I never thought I'd be the mother who gets a formal invitation to her only son's wedding, only to realize the envelope didn't contain a seat assignment, but a legal invoice for $80,000 covering the entire ceremony, and a 3-week honeymoon in Bora Bora. My son, Leo, looked me dead in the eyes and told me that while my presence would ruin the aesthetic of his high society nuptials, my bank account was still expected to be the guest of honor. Imagine being told you're too middle class to sit in the front row, yet wealthy enough to fund the caviar and the private jet for the very people who just disowned you. I'm sitting here in my quiet living room, surrounded by boxes of memories of a boy I thought I raised better than this, wondering where it all went so horribly wrong. Was I wrong for refusing to pay a single cent after being treated like a human ATM? Or should I have just sucked it up for the sake of family peace? Tell me, if your own flesh and blood handed you a bill for a party you weren't allowed to attend, would you pay it or would you burn the bridge like I did? To understand how we got to this point, you have to understand the dynamic between Leo and me. I raised him as a single mother after his father walked out when Leo was only 5 years old. It wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, pulling double shifts at the hospital as a nurse and then doing administrative work on the weekends just to make sure he had the best shoes, the best tutors, and a college fund that would ensure he never had to struggle the way I did. I remember the nights I would come home with my feet swollen and my back aching, only to stay up another 3 hours helping him with his history projects or proofreading his essays. Every penny I made was categorized: mortgage, utilities, and Leo's future. I didn't buy myself a new coat for 7 years. I wore the same pair of scuffed black work shoes until the soles were thin as paper. I didn't mind. I thought I was building a foundation for a man who would appreciate the grit it takes to survive. I took pride in his success. When Leo graduated from an Ivy League school and landed a high-paying job in corporate law, I felt like our collective hard work had finally paid off. But as his salary grew, so did his ego, and so did his distance from the world he came from. He started dating Clara about 3 years ago. Clara comes from old money, or at least that's the image she meticulously maintains. Her family owns estates, they go on hunting trips, and they speak in a way that makes you feel like you're being interviewed for a service position rather than being greeted as a future-in-law. From the moment Leo introduced us, I felt the coldness. We met at a high-end French restaurant where the menu didn't even have prices. I was nervous, wearing my best Sunday dress, but the look Clara gave me as I sat down, a slow, sweeping gaze from my sensible heels to my slightly frizzy hair, told me everything I needed to know. She didn't see a mother. She saw a service provider who had outlived her usefulness. Throughout that dinner, Leo didn't defend me once. When Clara's mother mentioned their family's annual gala and asked where I usually summered, I honestly replied that I usually spent my summers working extra shifts so I could take Leo to the lake for a weekend. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the literal cringe on Leo's face, as if my mention of honest labor was a stain on the tablecloth. Leo looked ashamed. Not ashamed of their elitism, but ashamed of my honesty. Over the next year, the invitations to dinner became fewer. The phone calls from Leo started to feel like obligations, short, clipped conversations where he'd mention networking or client dinners as a reason to hang up. He stopped coming home for the holidays, claiming work was too busy, though I'd see photos on social media of him at ski resorts with Clara's family, wearing a $1,000 parka and holding a glass of champagne, looking like he'd been born into a world of silk and snow. He looked like a stranger to me. When Leo finally called to tell me he was engaged, I cried tears of joy. I thought, despite everything, this would be the moment we'd reconnect. I offered to help in any way I could. I told him I'd been saving a specific wedding fund for him since he was a toddler. It wasn't millions, but it was a substantial amount. Nearly $80,000, representing my life savings, the result of decades of skipped vacations and overtime shifts. It was intended to give him a head start on a house or a beautiful celebration. He sounded relieved on the phone, almost warm for once. He told me Clara had big visions for the wedding and that my contribution would make things much smoother. We spent the next few months communicating via email about the budget. He sent me spreadsheets of vendors, floral arrangements that cost more than my first car, and a venue that looked like a royal palace. I assumed, naturally, that as the mother of the groom and the sole financier of this event, I would be involved in the planning. I waited for the dress shopping invite. I waited for the tasting. I even bought a small notebook to jot down ideas for my mother of the groom speech. It never came. Every time I asked about a date to go look at venues together, he'd deflect. Clara's got it handled, Mom. Or it's a very specific vibe. We don't want to overwhelm you. I felt a nagging pit in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I told myself he was just stressed. Then came the courier. 3 weeks ago, the invitation arrived. It wasn't an invitation. It was a thick folder. Inside was a letter from Leo, written with the clinical coldness of a legal brief. He explained that Clara's family felt that having a working-class mother at the wedding would be distracting and might lead to uncomfortable questions from their social circle about Leo's background. He said that to keep the peace and ensure Clara had her perfect day, it would be best if I stayed home. He actually wrote the words, "We will send you a professional video of the ceremony afterward, so you can feel like you were there." He suggested I could have a private viewing party at my house. Attached to this letter was the final invoice from the wedding planner, totaling exactly $80,000, along with a note saying, "Since you promised this money, please wire it by Friday so we can finalize the bookings for the Bora Bora suite." I sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours, staring at that paper until the ink blurred. I looked at the photos of him on the wall, the little boy with the missing front tooth, the teenager in his graduation gown, and I couldn't find him in the words on that paper. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a realization that the son I had sacrificed my youth for didn't see me as a person, but as a transaction. He didn't want my love. He wanted my life's blood in the form of a bank transfer. So that is the situation I found myself in. I was being asked to pay for the privilege of being excluded and humiliated by my own child. I was being told I was good enough to pay for the aesthetic, but not good enough to be seen in it. I had the money sitting in an account, ready to be sent. I had a choice. I could be the bigger person, pay the bill, and hope that my generosity would one day earn me a place back in his life, or I could stand up for my own dignity. Before I tell you what I did and the absolute chaos that ensued when the vendors realized the checks weren't coming, I want you to pause right now. Go down to the comments and tell me, would you pay that $80,000 just to keep your son in your life, or would you do exactly what I was about to do? I really want to know if I'm the villain here. I didn't wire the money. Instead, I did something much more definitive. I called the wedding planner directly. Her name was Julianne, and she sounded like she was used to dealing with people who had more money than sense. I asked her if the contracts were in my name. She told me that while Leo and Clara had signed them, I was listed as the guarantor and the primary payer. I asked her if I had the legal right to cancel. She stammered, "Well, yes, but the wedding is in less than a month." I told her, very calmly, that I was withdrawing my financial support immediately. I told her that if Leo and Clara wanted their 5-tier cake and their orchid-covered ballroom, they would have to find another way to pay for it. I told her to send all future invoices directly to Leo's law office. Then I went to my bank. I sat with a manager and moved the entire $80,000 into a high-yield investment account that Leo has no access to. I didn't stop there. I blocked Leo and Clara on everything. I deleted my social media apps so I wouldn't be tempted to check their profiles. I knew the fallout would be nuclear, and I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, my landline, the one I keep for emergencies, started ringing. Then my work phone. Then restricted calls. It was Leo. He was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Apparently, the venue had called him to say the deposit hadn't been cleared, and the entire reservation was at risk of being canceled by the end of business day. He called me selfish, bitter, and spiteful. He told me that I was ruining the most important day of his life over a small misunderstanding. When I asked him how banning his mother from his wedding was a misunderstanding, he had the audacity to say that I should be happy he was moving up in the world, and that a true mother would want her son to fit into his new life, even if it meant staying in the shadows. He told me I was being emotional and irrational, and that I was jealous of Clara's lifestyle. That was the moment the last string of my heart snapped. The boy I raised would have never used those words. This was a man I didn't recognize. I told him that if he was so high society now, he should have no problem asking Clara's wealthy parents for the $80,000. I told him that if my presence would ruin the aesthetic, then surely my middle-class money would do the same. He went silent, a long, heavy silence, because he knew and I knew that Clara's parents are the kind of people who talk about money but never actually spend their own. They expected me, the hard-working nurse, to foot the bill while they took the credit and acted like they were doing me a favor by letting me pay. I told him, "Leo, you have 24 hours to find a new guarantor, or the wedding is over. Do not call me again." I hung up on him and for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The following week was a blur of drama that I heard about through the grapevine. One of my old friends still follows Clara on Instagram, and she sent me screenshots. The grand wedding was falling apart at the seams. Clara was posting cryptic stories about fake people and betrayal. Apparently, when Clara's parents were asked to cover the $80,000, they refused, saying it was Leo's responsibility to manage his family. The old money wasn't coming to the rescue. The wedding didn't happen the way they planned. Without my money, they had to scale back everything. They lost their deposits on the palace venue, the custom-made designer gown, and the private jet to Bora Bora. They ended up having a small ceremony in a local park with a dinner at a mid-range restaurant that usually hosts high school reunions. Clara apparently had a complete breakdown during the reception, blaming Leo for lying about his family's wealth and humiliating her in front of her friends. Her parents were embarrassed, and the old money friends they wanted to impress didn't even show up because the invitation had changed from a black tie gala to a casual garden gathering. Leo tried to sue me for the promised funds, claiming a verbal contract and detrimental reliance. He actually had his lawyer friends send me a formal demand letter. I laughed as I shredded it. My own lawyer, a friend from my nursing days, told me he didn't have a leg to stand on. You can't sue someone for not giving you a gift, especially when you've breached every social contract of being a decent human being. He hasn't spoken to me since, and honestly, the silence is a gift. I spent weeks mourning the son I thought I had, but then I realized that the man he became was someone I didn't even like. I took that $80,000 and I did something I never thought I'd do. I booked myself a solo trip around Europe. I went to the French Riviera, not as a guest at a wedding I wasn't wanted at, but as a woman who finally understood her own value. I sat at those same expensive restaurants, wearing my middle-class clothes, and I enjoyed every single bite. I'm spending my retirement fund on the person who actually earned it, me. I bought a small cottage by the lake, the same one Leo used to love, and I'm filling it with people who actually want to be in my presence. I've realized that you can't buy love, and you certainly shouldn't pay for your own disrespect. There is a specific kind of freedom that comes from letting go of someone who only sees you as a resource. I used to think my purpose was to be his ladder, but ladders get walked on, and then left behind once the person reaches the top. I'm done being a ladder. This whole experience taught me that blood doesn't always mean family, and sacrifice doesn't always guarantee gratitude. I spent 20 years pouring everything into a vessel that turned out to be empty. But I'm not empty anymore. I'm whole, I'm independent, and I'm finally living for myself. I still see his name in the news sometimes, or mentioned in legal circles, and I feel a small pang of what could have been. But then I remember that folder, that invoice, and that video he promised to send me. I remember the coldness in his voice when he called me distracting. If you're ever put in a position where someone asks you to fund your own exclusion, remember that no is a complete sentence. Your worth is not determined by how much you can provide for people who don't respect you. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by keeping my money and my pride. Subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and dealing with entitled family members. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Do you think Leo will ever realize what he lost, or is he too far gone? Would you have held out for a reconciliation? Or was I right to burn the bridge? I'll see you all in the next story.